Okay, Parashah Tetzaveh, number 2 from Rav Shai, called Between Ecstasy and Constancy, the Dynamics of Covenantal Commitment. Share my screen. Okay, here we go. Rabbinic interpretation of Parashat Tetzaveh paints a powerful portrait of covenantal mutuality, of God's commitment to Israel and of Israel's commitment to God. This, by the way, is his kind of intro, which he's going to prove. This is not a kind of necessarily an obvious description of what's going on in the Parsha. He's going to set out to demonstrate that this is the case. But it also claims, crucially, that covenantal mutuality depends less on ecstasy than on constancy. Covenant thrives ultimately less on high drama than on the day-to-day commitment to living with God. I didn't see him reference this in any of the footnotes, as he sometimes cross-references his own, essays on similar topics. But in Vayikra and Parshat Emor, when we were learning about the Shalosh Regalim, we studied his discussion of Sukkot and the fact that Sukkot had the, highest frequency of the commitment or the mitzvah to rejoice. And he demonstrated that that had to do with the joy of the everyday, of the quotidian, as he called it, because Sukkot commemorated, God being with the Jewish people every day in their wanderings in the wilderness, as opposed to Pesach and Shavuot, which were about peak moments, and that there's a special kind of joy in the everyday, which is almost more significant than the kind of peak joy of special moments. So this, I think, follows on a similar theme. Okay. As Parashat Tetzaveh opens, God instructs Moshe, you shall further command the Israelites, right, V'ata Tetzaveh, at Bnei Israel, to bring you clear oil of beaten olives for lighting, for kindling lamps perpetually, Laha'alot ner tamid. This is the end of the first pasuk of the parasha. Traditional commentators disagree over the meaning of the word perpetually, tamid. Rashi understands it to mean that the lamps must be lit every evening and stay aflame until morning. But a midrash insists that perpetually, tamid, means that one lamp, the western light, the ner ma'aravi, is to burn constantly, day as well as night. From this perpetually burning western light, all the other lights are kindled each night. It is this latter approach, the approach of the midrash, right, that tamid means all the time, not just daily or nightly, really, but all the time. It is this latter approach that gives rise to the later custom of having a ner tamid, an eternal light burning in the synagogue. What is odd about the midrash's position is that it seems to be directly contradicted by the very next verse. Aaron and his sons shall set the lamps up in the tent of meeting, outside the curtain, which is over the Ark of the Covenant, to burn from evening to morning before the Lord. The Torah thus makes explicit what perpetually means. Evening to morning, as Rashi notes, and not constantly, as the Midrash suggests. This is so obvious that one has to ask, what leads the Midrash to its seemingly implausible reading of the biblical text? Okay, so it's worth just looking at that for a moment in the psukim themselves. Try to do that. Okay, so we have here, further instruct the Israelites, bring clear olive oil for kindling lamps regularly, laha'alot ner tamid, and then what seems to be further description, Aaron and his son should set them up in the tent of meeting, right? Me'erev ad boker lifnei Hashem, from evening to morning before Hashem, and that's ostensibly what tamid means, not continually. So what's the Midrash basing itself on? One possibility is suggested by a striking passage from the Talmud. Puzzled by the commandment to kindle a lamp for God, Sheshet asks, does God then require its light? Right? Why are we if the Mishkan is God's home, and so we're lighting a lamp in God's home, does God need light? Surely during the entire 40 years that the Israelites traveled in the wilderness, they traveled only by God's light. They had a pillar of fire to guide them. But the light is a testimony, but meaning rather, the light is a testimony to humanity that the divine presence rests in Israel. But if the light is intended to symbolize God's presence, then it stands to reason that the light must be kept constantly aflame. Just as God is always present, so must the light always be shining, right? So if the lamp, the menorah, is not because God needs any light, but because the Mishkan should include some symbol outwards to the world about God's presence dwelling amongst the children of Israel, then God's presence is at all times, and therefore the menorah must be lit at all times. So that's a good basis for the Midrash. And yet, the plain sense pshat of the text accords with Rashi's reading. In fact, the cantillation marks the trap, Bernie, makes this clear. There is a pause between ner and tamid, lahalot ner, tamid, right? To kindle a lamp, tamid, perpetually, indicating that a better translation would be for kindling lamps regularly, as opposed to for kindling an eternal light. For kindling lamps regularly. Rabbi Yehoyada Amir, who I had not heard of, and in typical Rav Shai fashion, exposing us to things we might not otherwise see. This is from the Israeli Reform Movement's weekly Parashah page, to kindle a lamp, thoughts on Parashah Tetzaveh from reform.org.il. No idea whether Rav Shai weekly reads that, Tamid, or not, but we get access to it through him. Rabbi Yehoyada Amir explains that the focus of the commandment is not on the light always being a flame, but on Israel's obligation to kindle it again and again. Accordingly, the intention of the text is not to give expression to the presence of God in our midst, as the eternal light in our synagogues likely does. Rather, this is a light kindled always before the Lord by the children of Israel. This is a light that we are commanded to kindle before God in order to express our presence before God, our standing ready to serve as partners in the work of holiness and the work of creation. Over the course of Exodus, God has shown that God will be present for Israel. Now God asks for reciprocity. Israel, too, must be present for God. I think this Rabbi Yehoyada Amir little passage is very, very beautiful, right? If something were perpetually burning, then at some level, maybe we only lit it one time and it burned on from there, or, on the occasion that it would go out or be at the risk of going out, we would relight it. But we wouldn't actually get to engage in the regular act of lighting, or we would have to extinguish it in order to relight it. But this way, by not having it burn at all times, but daily, we actually get to engage in the daily act of kindling. While the plain sense meaning and the midrashic interpretation of the text seem clearly at odds with one another, taken together, they form a potent symbol of God and Israel's life together. The light burning in the Mishkan makes the statement that God and the people are perpetually committed to and present for one another, right? So the midrashes take the midrashes take that it's symbolic of God's presence in an ongoing way is one, and the plain sense that it's indicative of or creates the ongoing and regular commitment for us to engage with or bear witness to God's presence is the complement. Parashat Tetzaveh mandates another ritual of constancy in addition to kindling lights regularly. Twice a day, the perpetual offering, Korban Tamid, must be brought. And in the footnote, he mentions that the Parsha talks about a third Tamid, which is the twice a day flour offering, the Minchat Chabitin, which was offered twice a day as well. So twice a day, the perpetual offering, the Korban Tamid, must be brought. God tells Moshe, this is what you should offer upon the altar. 2 yearling lambs each day, regularly, Tamid. You shall offer the one lamb in the morning, and you shall offer the other lamb at twilight, a regular burnt offering throughout the generations. By the way, this actually here, if Tamid then means once a day, and so the Korban Tamid is 2 lambs each offered once a day, then we have the lighting of the lamp of being lahalot ner tamid. We have a kind of consistency within tamid in that it means daily. So the korban tamid, there are 2 of them, and each is a daily offering, a daily morning offering and a daily evening offering. And the kindling of the lamps is also daily, daily done, at night to last until morning. Bible scholar John Durham explains that the Korban Tamid was offered in the morning, probably at the beginning of the day's activity, and in the evening just before nightfall. Thus, the day was opened and closed with gifts to God, from whom all gifts were believed to come. Durham points to a fascinating reversal in Exodus. So much of the book, Exodus, Desert Journey, Sinai, has been concerned with God demonstrating God's presence by what God does. Now, with these rituals of constancy, God's presence is demonstrated by what Israel does. In kindling a light and offering sacrifices each day, Israel testifies to its confidence that God is really present, always. And in so doing, it meets God's presence with an affirmation of its own. Strikingly, the laws of the Korban Tamid are followed immediately in the very same verse by an affirmation that God will meet with Israel and speak with Israel at the very place that it brings these offerings. It is in these ordinary, repetitious rituals on the part of the priests that God promises to meet with God's people. According to these passages, then, the presence of God is both demonstrated and elicited, not primarily through intense drama, but through daily discipline. Okay, carrying further. Rav Yehuda Brandis notices an important tension between the names of the 2 parshiot, Teruma and Tetzaveh. Often they are read together as a double parsha, but certainly in a leap year, they're read separately. Teruma and Tetzaveh that convey God's instructions for the building of the Mishkan, whereas the word Teruma, gift, connotes voluntary giving. The word Tetzaveh, command, connotes obligation. Parashat Teruma begins by appealing to the hearts of the Israelites. God instructs Moshe to tell the Israelite people to bring me gifts. You shall accept gifts for me from every person whose heart so moves him. In stark contrast, Parashat Tetzaveh opens, as we have seen, with the command, not the request, but the command, that the people bring oil for kindling the lights regularly. Brandis finds the meaning of this polarity in the fact that while Teruma deals with the construction of the Mishkan, Tetzaveh is concerned with preparing the priests for their service. The initial construction of the Mishkan and its vessels is a one-time event. The one-time preparations are exciting. As for any important building project, it is relatively easy to enlist donors. But the service in the Mishkan is different. Service requires consistency and constancy. It does not contain the same excitement. There's an element of routine to it, which can sometimes be exhausting and dispiriting. For one-time events, one can rely on passion and spontaneity. For enduring commitments, on the other hand, one needs steadiness and steadfastness. What is true of service of God is true of any relational commitment we make. We commit that we will be present, even when the Spirit does not so move us. Consider love between spouses. The initial phase of a relationship is often a teruma moment, a time of freely flowing passion. But no one lives in an unwavering state of fierce ardor. At a certain point in the unfolding of a relationship, we discover that love is not only an emotion, but also an existential commitment. We decide that we will love even in moments when we are not overcome with feeling. To be sure, in order for existential commitment to endure, there need to be moments of fervor. But it is an illusion and a prescription for profound unhappiness to imagine that heightened passion is possible or even desirable at all times. Robust marriages do have truma moments, but what enables them to endure is the mutual commitment implied by Tetzaveh. Think about what Rav Avi often talks about of the two symbols of a wedding, the ring, which he always talks about as a simple plain ring because it's indicative of the simple, spontaneous, plain acts of love, an extra chore, an extra expression of love, and its counterpart, the ketubah, which is the dry, legalistic commitment of responsibility, which endures at all times. And that's sort of that pairing again between the moments of plain, simple, spontaneous love and the ongoing dimension of commitment and responsibility. Rav Yaakov ibn Chabiv reports a rabbinic debate about what constitutes the great, or perhaps the most encompassing, principle in the Torah, klal gadol batorah. Ben Zoma argues that the Shema, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord alone, is the most encompassing. Ben Nanas, in contrast, advocates for V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. Each position has much to recommend it, affirming our utter loyalty to the one God and striving to love others are both fundamental to what it means to serve God and take Torah seriously. But Shimon ben Pazi insists that a very different verse is in fact the most encompassing one in the Torah. You shall offer the one lamb in the morning, and you shall offer the other lamb at twilight, right? The Korban Tamid. An anonymous sage stands up and declares the law is like Shimon ben Pazi. This is on the surface an astonishing midrash. How can such a seemingly pedestrian verse compete with and even outweigh two of Judaism's most fundamental, compelling, and inspiring teachings? Shimon ben Pazi's point is crucial, and as I have suggested, it lies at the very heart of Parashah Tetzaveh. In serving God, consistency and constancy may just be the most important things in the world. The point is not really that the twice daily sacrifice is more important than affirming God or learning to love. The point, rather, is that in order to affirm God with the totality of who we are, and in order to love others in all that we do, right? Shema and V'ahavta l'recha kamocha, regularity and steadfastness are essential. We should not overinflate the point, because this is Rav Shai, coming from both sides. We should not overinflate the point. Total inattention to experience or to what is meaningful can all too easily reduce religion to sterile and lifeless rote. Practices we habitually repeat, but that express nothing real, deep, or important. And yet, now the other side, obsessive focus on experience and meaning can reinforce narcissism and self-absorption, which are perennial dangers in the spiritual life. Like romantic passion, religious experience does matter, though we should be careful not to assume that only ecstatic, high voltage, I think that's a Rav Yitzchak Greenberg term, high voltage religious experiences count as experience, right? Not only those do, there are others. In serving God, as in loving another person, never feeling it can be disastrous. But covenant, like marriage, is not built on experience alone, but also on loyalty, faithfulness, and showing up. This is what the rituals of constancy in Parashat Tetzaveh serve to remind us. There is no spiritual life without discipline and commitment. This may just be the most encompassing, and for many of us, the most challenging principle in the Torah. So we got a chance to sort of journey through here his thesis that the parasha is about our commitment to God, the mutuality of that commitment and covenant, and that it thrives, as he says at the outset, less on high drama than on the day-to-day commitment to living with God. We first encounter the two different interpretations of Tamid in the Ner Tamid. First, the Rashi's interpretation that it means nightly, and then the Midrash that it means at all times. we get the basis for the Midrash that if it's really representing God's presence to the outside world, then it should be perpetual. But if it's representing our kind of affirmation by our presence respective to God, then it doesn't have to be every instant, but it has to be regular and something which sort of demands um, our regular action or participation. And so daily is more important than continual in that sense. And we put that alongside the second of the three mentions of Tamid in our parashah, ritual mentions of Tamid in our parashah, and that's the Korban Tamid. Same idea, now twice a day, and that this is, again, indicative of this shift from the first half of Shemot to the second half, first half being about God proving God's presence with the Jewish people, and now our affirmation of our presence with God through, in particular, the service in the Mishkan. This contrast between Teruma and Tetzaveh, and that in service, in a sense, it's less about the big moments and more about the command and the commitment to that regularity of presence, and then demonstrated that further by the idea that the Korban Tamid is chosen by one sage as the Klal Gadol BaTorah, even more than Shema or V'ahavta l'reacha kamocha, and perhaps that's because it is the sort of essential ingredient in those things, going beyond the big moments to the daily, and then put that in context to say that itself is not sufficient, but it is as important, if not more important, than the grand moments, and that they have to go hand in hand. And then he sort of threw in at the very, very end that it's not just perhaps the most encompassing, but also for many of us the most challenging, that dimension of consistency with sort of continual referent of spousal relationships as being something which needs high voltage moments, but ultimately, as much, if not more, depends on the regularity and consistency of loyalty and commitment. Thoughts, comments, reactions to this idea? Yeah, Lance, go ahead.
Okay, I would like to suggest another, for me, much more important thought or group thoughts. If I'm not for myself, who will be for me? If I'm only for myself, what am I? And if not now, when? I think this whole business of ordinary versus holiness is really a misunderstanding of the world. The world is ambiguous. We tend to look at the desert as some kind of dry place, whereas in Exodus, it's clearly a magical world in which manna appears, in which there's a cloud. And if you look at the footnotes, if I'm correct, at some point down there, Rabbi Hill talks about Akiva and the understanding of the sukkah as an ordinary thing.
Mm-hmm.
Who's it, Eliezer, who understands as the clouds.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, and I think that's a very profound observation right there in the footnote, which he doesn't really bring into the main part of the argument. And it seems to me that on the one hand, Akiva sees the world as godless, and on the other hand, Uzzah Eliezer sees the world as filled with God. God is here, God is there, God is everywhere. And it seems to me, at the same time, calling the Kohanim ordinary is an insult. Just want to put that in there. That's what I call anti-Cohenism or Jewish anti-Semitism. Sorry about that.
Go back, Lance, go back to the quote, the Pirkei Avot quote that you quoted at the beginning, and just tie that back in. I want to understand where that fits in.
Okay. If I'm not for myself, in other words, if I am someone who does not assert myself on my own behalf, who's going to be for me? If, on the other hand, I'm only for myself, then what am I? I mean, I'm a narcissist. I'm someone who has no empathy, someone who's no concept of social justice. And if not now, when? In other words, um, now the only real time is now. There's no yesterday, there's no tomorrow, there's right now, right here
Mm-hmm.
where we
Mm-hmm.
are. That's it. Okay. And we move from now to now to now to now.
Mm-hmm.
Don't move from the past into the future. So
Sort
that
of serves as a contrast somehow to the Tamid argument as just sort of like a don't think about kind of a regularity or constancy, just think about this moment, even though life is filled with every moment being this moment, but it's a now focus. And,
right. We light the light or do the sacrifice, whatever, now, right
mm-hmm,
now.
mm-hmm,
Whether we do it in morning, evening, afternoon,
mm-hmm.
doesn't really make any difference. The point is you got to do it now, and now is the only time you can do it.
Great.
Okay. So that's what I was thinking anyway.
Thank you. And a good uh, companion text to this one. Yeah. Yes, I don't think any insult was intended to the Kohanim, but thank you for raising up their profile as
No,
always.
that was more of a joke.
Yes, yes, yes.
Thank you.
Other comments or thoughts? I will say, as I read this, that I find I there are certain parts of religious life in which constancy or regularity I find is somewhat easy, or not as challenging. But I think there are parts of religious life where you know, where I see the benefit. I absolutely see the benefit uh, of regularity, and I find it very challenging. I think in, carving out daily committed time for different parts of our religious lives, um, is something where, again, I really, really see the benefit, but I resonate with his ending, of this being, not just one of the most important, um, but actually one of the most challenging principles of the Torah. I think, um, just really having a commitment to that sort of to regularity and consistency of practice, um, I think is very challenging in our lives. So I take it as a good kind of goad and challenge. Other thoughts before we circle back to Lance to wrap up? All right, you got it, Lance.
Okay. If you look carefully at the text, you will find a rhetorical pattern called chiasmus.
Mm-hmm.
With chiasmus.
Yep. How do you
And
see it? Like an ABCBA type of thing?
right. Ask not what your country can do for you. Ask what you can do for
Mm-hmm.
your country. And there's a kind of parallel article by Rabbi Jonathan Sachs, in which he basically says, and I think this is consistent really with what Rabbi Hill is saying, ask not what God can do for you, ask what you can do for God.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that resonates. And although with chiasmus, I think the idea is what's at the center is really the focus. And I don't know if the focus is on us per se as the kind of ultimate point, but maybe not on us as the purpose, but on us as the necessary actors, right? It's not about um celebrating ourselves, but it is about the idea that it depends on our action or our taking of responsibility and commitment. So I think that the focus on us, for what we can do for God or for the world or for each other absolutely is the kind of reframe here that's important. Um, I also think, just in wrapping up, that there are other takes on in other places. Is sort of interesting to analyze the word tamid, across the Chumash. There are places where it might mean not daily but weekly or monthly, and so thinking about the different kind of registers of regularity is also, I think, a good thing to remind ourselves. There are commitments that we have that are twice daily. There are commitments that we have that are daily. There are commitments that we have that are monthly, and each of them has their own kind of importance of regularity or consistency. You could do something once a week, and it is still a consistent practice or a regular practice. And so, even thinking about, what are ways that we show commitment or engage in kind of connection with God, we want to do something regularly. That doesn't have to mean every hour or every day. It's just keeping to the rhythm that is the kind of klal gadol. That's the great principle. So not letting the perfect be the enemy of the good, figuring out the right regularity for ourselves and just trying to stick with that, I think is an important kind of goal. This is our weekly class, so we thank you for keeping with our consistency, keeping up the learning. That was part of the motivation for moving from Monday to Tuesday this week instead of canceling, that we not let another week go by not getting to learn together. So thanks to everybody who was able to join tonight, and looking forward to continuing next week. Good night to all. Love to mom and dad. Take care, everybody. Bye.